जी, बिस्मिल्लाह कीजिए।
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. I begin in the name of Allah, the God whose mercy is profound, whose kindness is forever. Why should we feel good to be Muslims? I have been mentioning different reasons why, despite the fact that most of us were born Muslims, uh, and obviously our discretion choice was not taken as to which religion should we belong to. Uh, we are born to a faith religion which, when we have grown up and understood it, we should feel good about it. Uh, Another reason why one should feel comfortable with the teachings of the religion that we were born with is that it presents the understanding of a life after this life, which has been done in a manner that makes a lot of sense. The Quran, if you look at the teachings of it, you would get a feeling that the major thrust emphasis of its teachings is to invite the reader to have an understanding, to believe in, and to feel comfortable and confident that this is not the only life that we will be given to experience and live. Beyond this life, there is going to come another life, which is what one should prepare for in this life. This life of ours is only a trial, and the next life is going to be the result of the trial, of the test that we are going through. Obviously, for an intelligent individual, for a thinking mind, the question arises, uh, why? And another question that arises is how? We find that the Quran has actually given answers to both questions in detail and convincingly. Why should there be a life hereafter? And how is it possible that after we will be dead, we'll be brought back to life? Uh, in the answer that has been provided to the question, why should there be a life hereafter? The Quran gives basically two answers. One, this life of ours makes no sense. It's incomplete. It's absurd unless we have an understanding, uh, belief, and confidence that there's going to be another life. And the other answer is that if one believes in God, then belief in God is incomplete without belief in the life hereafter. Let's take the first of the two explanations. This life is incomplete. This life makes no sense without another life. The Quran tells us that there is an underlying principle on the basis of which the Almighty has created this worldly life of ours. And that principle is that no matter what God has created in this life, He has created it in pairs. وَمِن كُلِّ شَيْءٍ خَلَقْنَا زَوْجَيْنِ لَعَلَّكُمْ تَذَكَّرُونَ. This is Surah Az-Zariyat, Surah number 51, verse 49. No matter what He has created in pairs so that you may ponder and reflect. Now, what it means is that the principle of pairs that you find all across the Almighty's creation is that there is a reality which has its own merits but has its own flaws as well. The flaws of it are compensated for by another reality, another existence, which is the partner of the first one. Uh, the partner makes up for the weaknesses of the first reality. And this partner has its own flaws shortcomings, which in turn are taken care of by the first partner of the pair, so that the two put together they form a pair. Whether it's the night and day, the heavens and the earth, humans, plants, animals, etc., you name it. The Almighty says everything that He has created in pairs so that you may ponder and reflect. That is, you may ponder and reflect upon the fact that this life of ours that we are living and experiencing is also, despite its merits, its brilliance, has its own flaws. Had it been a perfect life, there wouldn't have been a need for another life. It would have been taken as an exception to the rule. But the fact of the matter is, that the life of ours has its flaws, serious problems, which, so long as they are there, this life too will be in search for a partner. The Quran mentions some of its flaws, like, for example, there isn't justice in this life, even though justice is what all humans look for. Every human being wants that there should be justice in life. However, justice is what we do not normally find taking place. So long as this life is unjust, this life is incomplete. Likewise, what we find in this life is that even though we try to enjoy this life and feel good about it, the fact of the matter is that in this life we have fears of the future, apprehensions of what's going to happen next, and sorrows and regrets of the past. So, you know, living in this world, we cannot run away from the fact that we are constantly influenced by this painful feeling of fear and of sorrow. And it's there in life, one cannot avoid it. Likewise, we have within us as humans a conscience which pricks when things go wrong. Uh, Human conscience is a barometer which constantly enables us to know, to find out as to whether things are that are happening are moving in the right direction or not. And it so happens quite often that our conscience is not at ease. It pricks, it protests, and the world continues to function against its dictates, its verdicts. But by far, the biggest problem in this life is that this life comes to an end. Death is what makes this life absolutely incomplete. We all know that we're going to die, and yet, whenever a person dies, it's considered to be a tragedy. We don't like it. The sadness and the sorrow that engulfs the environment is in itself a testimony of the fact that death is unnatural. We are never comfortable with the idea. Uh, it is as if we are born with a very strong yearning to go on living, to live forever. And yet, the fact of the matter is that we live in this life for a very short while. All these flaws that one experiences in life, absence of justice, sorrows of the past, and fears of the future, the pricking of the conscience, and the staring eyes of the death, they are all a problem which cause this life, despite its brilliance, despite the fact that we love it, it's incomplete. It has problems. So long as these problems are there, humans, thinking minds, would always be looking for a partner of this life because that's what the pattern is. Everything that has been created has been created in pairs, why would it be that this life will have no other partner? So that the Quran tells us that the life hereafter is the partner of this life. And when the life hereafter would come, this life would get as if the response, the answer to all those queries, questions, and anxieties that we have in this life because of its incompleteness. Together with the next life, this life form a pair, like there are pairs in everything that the Almighty has created. So the next life will have complete justice. The next life is going to enable the successful people to live in a paradise where there are going to be no sorrows of the past, nor any fears of the future. The next life is going to see human conscience completely satisfied as everything is going to be happening in accordance with its dictates, and there is going to be no death in the next life. So, the weaknesses, the flaws of this life are going to be adequately taken care of by the next life. And the next life is going to be incomplete without a preceding worldly life, because it would make no sense to have all those brilliant features of the next life without it being the result of a trial that we go through in this life. So that the Quran, the way it presents the life hereafter, it actually gives us a feeling that it is a natural consequence of the present life. Without the understanding of the next life, this life is meaningless and absurd. The other reason that the Quran mentions why one has to believe, one ought to believe if one is a rational being in the next life is, if one believes in God, then one ought to believe in the next life as well. Why? Because God, we know through his attributes. God is just and fair, but this life is not just and fair. So, in order for God to be fair, there has to come another life. And that's exactly what the Quran continues to tell us, that the just and fair God is going to make sure that this life gives way to another life. The Quran asks this question in Surah Al-Qalam, Surah 68. Afa naj'alul muslimina kal mujrimin. So, if your assumption is that there's going to be no life beyond this life, then do you think that we are going to consider those who are obedient and good the same as those who are disobedient? Malakum, what has happened to you? Kaifa tahkumun? How do you judge? How can you ever come to this conclusion that God Almighty, the fair and the just, is going to be comfortable with the idea that those who are good, pious, and upright humans are also going to die and perish, and those who are evil, have no scruples, are also going to perish and die, and they're going to be ultimately, at the end of the day, will be declared as equals. What has happened to you? Malakum, kaifa tahkumun? How do you come to this conclusion? The other attribute of the Almighty that we know very clearly of is that He is extremely merciful. And the Quran tells us that God is merciful, and therefore there's going to be life hereafter. We read it every day. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen, Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim, Maliki Yawmiddin. All praise and all expressions of thankfulness are for God, the sustainer of the entire humankind, whose mercy is profound, whose kindness is forever, who is the master of the day of judgment. That is, God is Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim. God's mercy is profound, his kindness is forever. It leads to the reality that he is also the master of the day of judgment. Why? Because in this worldly life, we do not have justice. We have people who are exploited, tortured, put in difficulty for no fault of theirs. And there are others who, despite the fact that they have got no principles, no scruples, they are enjoying their lives at the expense of others, and yet nothing seriously wrong happens to them. If God is merciful, how is it possible that He does not feel for those who suffer? So, if God is merciful, then there ought to be another life. And that's what the Almighty continues to emphasize, that there is going to be another life. Likewise, we are informed that God is wise, and therefore there's going to be another life. How is it possible that a wise God would create a world, a life, and give it to humans which has no purpose? You see, when there are happenings in this worldly life that make no sense, there is evil in this life which goes unchecked. There is virtue in this life which goes unrewarded. So it really means that if there's going to be no life after this life, that the one who has created this life is not concerned about it. He's not interested. So whether you do one thing or the other, it doesn't really make any difference. God is wise. He's not unwise. Therefore, He will make sure that after this life, there's going to come another life. That's why He mentions in the Quran on a number of occasions, like for instance, أَفَحَسِبْتُمْ أَنَّمَا خَلَقْنَاكُمْ عَبَثًا وَأَنَّكُمْ إِلَيْنَا لَا تُرْجَعُونَ. Do you think that we have created you for no reason, for no purpose, and that you're not going to return to us? فَتَعَالَى اللَّهُ الْمَلِكُ الْحَقِّ. The Almighty is far above this understanding. He is the true king, ruler of this existence. It's not possible that He is going to allow this life to continue the way it's proceeding without ensuring that there would be another life. If that would be the case, then it will have to be assumed that He's not wise. But He's Al Hakim, and therefore He will make sure that this life gets its meaning. Likewise, He is provider. He provides us with so many different facilities, resources that we need to live on. Uh, the Quran tells us that it makes no sense that you provide somebody with facilities, perks, resources, and you don't make him accountable. We humans, when we uh, enable people to be comfortable by providing them with resources, we require them to perform. In fact, the more resources we provide, the more perks we provide to somebody who is our employee, the more we expect him to perform better. Likewise, the Almighty says that uh, all the facilities that I've provided you with in order for you to live this life well, they're all there to remind you as well that ثُمَّ لَتُسْأَلُنَّ يَوْمَئِذٍ عَنِ النَّعِيمِ. Then you're going to be most certainly asked about the blessings that you were provided with. The Quran also answers this question as to how is it possible that we are going to be held accountable? That is, how is the process of accountability going to be possible? This question, in turn, again has two questions. It's broken down into two questions. How is it possible for humans to be brought back to life after they're going to be dead? And how is it going to be possible for that huge amount of information that will be needed in order for accountability to take place properly? In answering the first question, the Almighty says that He created humans in the first place. Why would it ever be difficult for Him to be created once again? So if God created you for the first time, ثُمَّ نُعِيدُ, we're going to do it again. It's not going to be difficult for us. So don't worry. Also, he points at the fact that we should look at the plants and crops that grow every year. The soil is dead. Nothing seems to be happening. It's all gone, parched. And then rain falls and plants emerge once again. Crops sprout from the soil. Like it happens every year, every season, in fact, in the case of crops and plants, it's going to happen in the case of humans as well, when it would come the time for the right opportune time for humans to be recreated. So, the world that we are living in itself is giving us good reasons to believe that God is going to be fully capable. God is fully capable of recreating humans after they're going to be dead. As far as the process of accountability is concerned and the information that is going to be needed uh, to get the accountability process underway uh, in a perfect manner, the Almighty says that the information that will be needed for God to enable humans to be held accountable, uh, for one thing, God Himself is perfectly knowledgeable. So, for a knowledgeable God, there is going to be no difficulty whatsoever in making humans accountable. He knows everything that is in the heavens and the earth. He knows what we do in the open and in hiding. In fact, He knows what's there in our hearts, what our intentions are. He knows even a leaf that drops anywhere in this world. And He also knows the seed that is sown inside the darkness of the heart of this soil. Everything that is happening in this world, God has complete and perfect knowledge of it. Also, the Almighty has made arrangements for angels to be together in the company of humans so that whatever humans say, ma yalfizu min qawlin illa ladayhi raqibun atid. There's nothing that humans speak, but there are angels who are prepared to write down what they're saying. The Almighty also tells us that on the day of judgment, our parts of the body, our limbs, hands, eyes, skin, they are going to testify against those people whose parts of body they were uh, for the deeds that they did. In other words, the accountability is also going to be presented with evidence from the very human himself, his different parts that were employed for the evil acts to be done are going to speak out. And the Almighty also mentions that on the day of judgment, um, He is also going to bring out and call for the services of those who delivered the Almighty's message to mankind, who made sure that humans come to learn about the fact as to what is right from what is wrong, what is expected from them. And these messengers and other pious people called Shohada, they will bear witness to the fact that humanity knew what was to be done, what was right from what was wrong. All in all, the Almighty says that there are going to be adequate arrangements for perfect information to be there for humans to be made accountable, and all those who are going to be declared unsuccessful will acknowledge themselves that most certainly the judgment that has been passed against us is completely fair and just. We cannot speak anything against it. So, the life hereafter that the Quran presents before us is presented in a manner that we feel comfortable with the fact A, if we are living this life, then this life has to be followed by another life. Otherwise, this life is in itself is incomplete. And B, that the next life is most certainly going to be possible as far as the possibility of physical recreation is concerned, and as far as the possibility of the availability of information for the process of accountability is concerned. That's from me.
Thank you, Dr. Zahir. That was a very enlightening discussion that you just shared with us. Um, Whoever's on the Zoom, if you have any questions, please unmute your microphone and start asking. Okay. So, Dr. Zahir, while they're thinking, um, let me ask you something. This is something that I personally had struggles with when I was growing up. We get stuck in this dichotomy where we have to accept that life is not perfect, right? But at the same time, Quran tells us that Allah Ta'ala loves, Allahu yuhibbul muhsinin. Allah Ta'ala loves people who try to do everything in the best possible way. And that's then also the society kind of puts pressure on us, our parents, our society, that we have to excel, right? So how do you balance this, that we have to accept that, okay, it's not going to be perfect, but we're still trying to be perfect? How do you balance this?
This balance is most certainly not possible unless you have a strong faith, confidence in the fact that there is going to be another life where you're going to be compensated for. You are working as best as you can, and you ought to work that way because that's what your creator wants from you. You will get some reward here, but not necessarily commensurate with what you are doing, but most certainly you're going to be provided with more than what you have done in another life, which is going to come very soon. So the Quran tells us that if we are living this life and experiencing it uh, with uh, our conscience fully aware and performing in the right way, our mind understanding what's happening around us, there is no way that we can this live this life properly unless we have an accompanying belief in the life hereafter. Without that belief, you're right. The problem that you're talking of is there. I mean, on the one hand, we are trying to do well, we mean well, we are doing things which are in accordance with the expectations of morality, and yet on the other hand, we are not getting a fair deal. So there is frustration. One asks oneself why, but once you're convinced that the God that has created us knows what we are doing, and He's going to make sure that if we continue to do well, there's going to be another life that He's arranged for where we are going to be adequately compensated for and rewarded for the good things that we are doing here. So that's why the life hereafter, its belief is so very important.
Great. Okay. Um, Again, reminder for everyone that if you have a question that you'd like to ask, please unmute your microphone and start asking. You can type in the question and I'll read it out to Dr. Zahir. Farhan Saab has created a WhatsApp group. You can send a message there. Um, so there is a question that if Allah knows everything, He knows who will go to heaven and who will go to hell, then how does free will play a part?
Right. This has to do with the last lecture. God has attributes. You see, in order for us to understand God, we ought to know God through how He has described Himself in His book. What He tells us is that we can't see God, but we can appreciate Him through His attributes. I mentioned yesterday that He has got all the good attributes. All His attributes are perfect, complete, and all His attributes are simultaneously functioning. So the question that has been asked has got to do with two important attributes of the Almighty. One, knowledge, and the other, justice. God is completely knowledgeable. Therefore, He knows the past, the present, and the future perfectly. So He knows my and your future as well. But because He is also simultaneously just and completely just and fair, therefore, what we are going to do, for which we are going to be held accountable, we will do it on our own volition, at our own discretion. We'll be doing it at our own free will, even though God will know it beforehand. So God knows it as to what we're going to do, but He also knows that what we are going to do, what is going to cause us to go one way or the other, we'll do it on our own freely. So that's why it's not something which is going to be unfair. However, what I have described is what we cannot fully properly comprehend, not because it's wrong, but because it's beyond the limits of our understanding. That's why we have been asked that just appreciate the Almighty's attributes and feel comfortable that each attribute is at play perfectly, and no one attribute would contradict the other.
Okay, that's great. So if I understand your answer correctly, what you're saying is that, like a teacher, like you're teaching right now, you know that Faisal Harun is a bad student and he will fail the class, but that doesn't stop Faisal Harun from doing whatever he's supposed to do to pass the class, right? I mean, your knowledge does not have any effect on the effort that I have to make.
Absolutely.
That's great. Talat Wahid Saiba, you have a question. Please unmute your microphone and start asking.
Yes, I have a question as to the taqdeer uh, and or um, Allah's uh, decision as to um, what He will allow me to do in my life. Um, does that have uh, an effect on what I pray for, what I want in my life? I
Okay,
don't know if I'm making myself clear.
I get what you're saying.
Does
You
that
see,
change if I am asking for something? But does God have a plan, or His plan, or I mean, or He makes His plan depending upon, uh, since He has given me this will of whether I'm going to go to the right or I'm going to go to the left.
right. You see, there are certain things where we have no role to play, and those are very few. Uh, the place and the parents we were born to, uh, the time and era that we were given to live in this world, our some personal endowments, our level of intelligence, our physical features, our gender, etc. However, there are a number of features in our life wherein we have been given full liberty to do whatever we want to. God decides on the basis of one underlying principle, and that is how best to put the individual to the trial and test, which is going to ultimately find out as to which of the two categories he or she belongs to, the category of those who are good performers or the category of those who are bad performers. Now, coming to your question, you pray to the Almighty that such and such thing should happen. Uh, the Almighty wants us to pray to Him because He wants this relationship between us and God to be a relationship of a slave, of a person in need, and the master who is generous, who is kind, who is loving. So pray we must. And the Almighty has also ensured that the manner things proceed, our prayers also do have a role in what's going to happen. God knows what's going to happen. He also knows that we're going to pray to Him for certain things, and He makes sure that our prayers are heard. Because don't forget that apart from many other attributes of God, His one attribute is that He's all hearing. So He hears what we say to Him, and He absorbs positively all our good prayers, some of which are implemented the way we ask them to be done. Some of them are implemented in a way which are different from our expectations, but in the Almighty's scheme of things, they are even better for us. And in some cases, our prayers are held back to be responded to positively for the next life so that we get much better reward there for what we are asking for. But most certainly, our prayers do have an impact on what would happen in the future. But the Almighty is the best judge, and therefore it's His discretion to decide as to which prayer is going to be responded to exactly in the form that we are expecting it to be done, and what prayers are going to be given a different treatment.
So is it fair to say that I mean, I understand, thank you very much, sir, but I want to take it a little further, that does he have different takdirs, like if Talat does this, then that is going to be Allah's plan for me, you know, if I disobey, if I do bad things, wrong things, that this is the path that this will Allah will make this path for me, then okay, because that depends on where I want to go, because there's no compulsion. And but since he knows already, he has the knowledge as to what I'm going to do the future in future. So depending on his hikmah, his adl, he already knows there's already a plan for me. Is it possible? We
Uh,
don't know that, do we?
Actually, you answered the question yourself.
Okay.
On the one hand, it's true that there are several, numerous different possibilities that are available to us,
Yeah.
and it has been left to us to decide as to which path we would want to go. On the other hand, and obviously, depending upon how we perform, how we make our decisions, we will follow the path that we will choose for ourselves, and the Almighty is going to enable us to follow it. He will pave the way for it. But that's one thing. The other thing you rightly said, all this he already knows. So he would know which path we are going to go for.
Yeah.
But his knowledge of it beforehand would not influence our decision making at all.
Correct. Thank you very much, sir. Appreciate it.
Welcome. Welcome.
Talat Sahiba already knew the answer to the question that she had asked. So
No, I just
no, I'm just joking. I'm just
no,
joking.
I just want to make sure that there's in certain areas there is one takdir. For example, like who my parents are going to be, or who my children are going to be, for example. But then in the other areas over which I have no control. So in the other areas, then there could be more than one takdir for me, depending
There,
upon my actions.
there are more than one possibilities for you.
Yeah.
And it's another matter that the one possibility that you're going to freely and completely freely choose for yourself, the Almighty already knows it.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, sir.
Great. Thank you. Any other questions on Zoom? Please unmute your microphone and start asking. You can type in your question. You can send it through chat on WhatsApp
Yes.
group.
Hi, this is Usma. I do have a question, which is kind of an existential question. Folks who end up on the wrong track of things in terms of the personal accountability and behavior, or those who get engulfed in bad deeds. Now, is that a takdir, or is that chosen by them? I mean, I'm always I wonder, were they preordained to do a certain thing which would take them down a wrong path, or did they have a choice to make?
It's very much relevant to what we are talking about. You see, if let's assume that there's somebody who was preordained to do things wrong, and that's what he did in his life and ended up doing it right from A to Z, had no discretion, no choice, was completely forced by circumstances, be absolutely sure that he is not going to be held accountable. However, whether that assumption is correct or not is only God knows. God tells us that generally speaking, humans have been provided with considerable discretion and liberty. So we choose our own path. We know what is right from what is wrong. And in the process of our journey of life, we take numerous decisions, all on our own. And it's those decisions that impact the ultimate journey that we undertake. And and obviously what we are doing right or wrong. The Almighty on the day of judgment is going to hold us accountable for the deeds that we will do, good or bad, that we did on our own discretion, freely choosing them. So, assuming that there are some people who were destined to do things wrong and they had no choice in what they did, they will be not held accountable at all. However, we humans are going to be held accountable for the deeds that we are going to do on our own volition, freely choosing them, knowing what we are doing is right or wrong. So that's what the accountability is going to make sure. God is going to be absolutely fair, and more than that, He is going to be kind and considerate as well.
So I'll ask the last question. I'm pretty sure that you won't have enough time to answer it, but if you can just kind of touch base on it, and then maybe at some later time we can discuss it further. One thing that um, uh, you know atheists they kind of ask us is that if Allah Ta'ala is so merciful and He's all knowing, then how come there's so much misery in the world, right? I mean, there are people dying, there are children dying, all these things that are happening. If Allah Ta'ala is so merciful and so all knowing, then that shouldn't happen.
Well, there are a number of aspects of it, but I'll just touch upon briefly two aspects. Those who are dying and the suffering that's going on is actually happening to two categories of people. Those who are grown up and are actually going through a real trial of this life. About them, the Almighty has given us complete assurance that if they are suffering for no fault of theirs and they are behaving okay and well, they are going to be adequately compensated for in the next life for the sufferings that they're going through here. That, in fact, is one of the reasons why there ought to be a life hereafter. I've already mentioned it. God is merciful, and therefore He will bring a life where He is going to make sure that the people who suffered for no reasons, no fault of theirs, they're going to be provided with adequate compensation, reward for them to feel good that all that they went through was, after all, not has not gone wasted. The other part of it is regarding the kids, children who don't grow up. The fact of the matter is that there's so many other such cases where people do not get the full opportunity of living. Now, what is going to happen to such kids who never got the opportunity of living a full life? We can only assume, and we assume it for good reasons, that God has all the good attributes, and the most predominant amongst them is that the Almighty is kind and merciful. He is also wise. So He is going to make arrangements in the next life which are going to help us understand that whatever happened for good reasons, and the next life is tailored, is designed to make sure that all woes, sufferings, tragedies, problems of this life are fully and adequately taken care of in the next life.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr.
Thank you.
Zahir. We are out of time for tonight. Inshallah, we'll see you tomorrow again.
Inshallah.
Thank you, everyone. Jazakallah.